She was the most formidable battleship ever launched at the time, displacing roughly 50,000 tons at full load. Constructed in open defiance of naval treaties, her very presence challenged British dominance at sea. Her name was Bismarck, Nazi Germany's flagship of naval power. For Britain's Royal Navy, her destruction became a singular objective. So long as she remained at large, the vital Atlantic convoys that sustained Britain were in grave danger. The Bismarck's 8 15-inch guns and 12.5-inch thick armor belt made her virtually invincible against most enemy warships. Hitler intended to use her for commerce raiding, cutting Britain's vital supply lines and potentially starving the nation into submission. But the British remembered what German surface raiders could do. In the same year of 1941, during Operation Berlin, the battle cruisers Scharnhorst and Gneisenau had torn through Allied shipping, sinking over 110,000 tons of merchant vessels. Bismarck had one sister ship, the Tirpitz, built to the same fearsome specifications. When Bismarck sortied into the Atlantic in May 1941 as part of Operation Rheinübung, the Royal Navy's response was unprecedented. They committed the largest naval force assigned to a single operation up to that point in the war. 6 battleships, 3 battle cruisers, 2 aircraft carriers, 16 cruisers and 33 destroyers, all hunting one ship. The sheer scale of the response shows you just how terrified the Admiralty was. Because if Bismarck reached the open Atlantic and started hunting convoys, the damage would be catastrophic. The question was, could they stop her? The first attempt to stop Bismarck came on the 24th of May 1941 in the Denmark Strait between Iceland and Greenland. The method was traditional surface combat. The pride of the Royal Navy battlecruiser HMS Hood, accompanied by the new battleship HMS Prince of Wales, would intercept and destroy the German raider. Vice Admiral Holland, commanding the British force, tried to close the distance quickly, but the approach angle was all wrong. Both British ships could only use their forward turrets. At 6:01, the unthinkable happened. A shell from the Bismarck penetrated the Hood's magazine. The massive battlecruiser exploded in a fireball visible for miles. 1,415 men died in seconds. Only 3 survived. It was the Royal Navy's worst disaster in living memory, but Prince of Wales, though taking hits, managed to land 3 critical blows with her 14-inch guns before breaking off. One shell hit the Bismarck's bow above the waterline, flooding the forecastle with about 1,000 tons of seawater and contaminating several fuel tanks. Another hit amidships below the waterline, flooding an electrical plant and partially flooding a boiler room. Bismarck's armour held the ship could still fight, but the fuel loss was catastrophic. Admiral Lütjens, the German commander, had no choice. Operation Rheinübung was over. Bismarck would have to make for a Brest in occupied France for repairs. The commerce raiding mission had failed before it even began. The British weren't about to let Bismarck escape. On the night of the 24th to 25th of May, they tried some different carrier-borne air power. 9 Fairey Swordfish torpedo bombers, ancient-looking biplanes launched from HMS Victorious through rough weather and fierce anti-aircraft fire. 1 torpedo struck home, hitting Bismarck amidships on the armoured belt. The armour did its job as the torpedo didn't penetrate, but the hydraulic shock from the explosion tore apart the temporary repairs the crew had made to the damaged fuel tanks, accelerating the leaks. Bismarck was bleeding fuel faster now her range was shrinking by the hour. Remarkably, no Swordfish were lost to the battleship's guns, though 2 accompanying Fulma fighters crashed trying to land on the carrier in the darkness. The weather was turning into brutal, gales with low clouds and driving rain. Bismarck temporarily escaped British radar on the 25th of May, and for agonizing hours the Admiralty thought they'd lost her. But on the morning of the 26th of May, by a stroke of luck, an American-made PBY Catalina flying boat spotted the German battleship. The hunt was back on. The British had learned something crucial. You couldn't rely on penetrating Bismarck armour. The main belt was too strong. Instead, they needed to cripple her mobility, damage her steering, and knock out her propulsion, turning the hunter into prey. The weapon that would ultimately seal Bismarck's fate was the 18-inch torpedo, delivered by the same obsolete aircraft that had already made an earlier attempt, the Fairy Swordfish. This time, however, they would be launched from HMS Royal, part of Forcer H Racing up from Gibraltar. The key was to strike the stern, where the ship's rudders were located outside the heavily armoured citadel. On the evening of May 26th, in a force 9 gale with low clouds and driving rain, 15 Swordfish took off from Royal. The conditions were appalling. The biplanes fought their way through the storm as Bismarck's anti-aircraft guns filled the sky with fire. At approximately 2100 hours, one torpedo found its mark. The explosion twisted and jammed both of Bismarck's rudders. The mighty battleship was now locked into a slow turn, unable to steer, moving away from safety instead of toward it. Admiral Lutyens recognized the situation was hopeless. He transmitted a final message. "Ship unmaneuverable. We shall fight to the last shell. Long live the Führer." The slow, outdated Swordfish biplanes had accomplished what modern battleships could not. They had effectively condemned Bismarck to destruction. Throughout the night of May 26th to 27th, 5 Tribal-class destroyers under Captain Philip Vian harassed the crippled Bismarck. In towering seas, with waves breaking over their bows, the destroyers made repeated torpedo attacks, firing star shells to illuminate the target. The German crew worked desperately to repair the damaged rudders, but the destroyers gave them no rest. Bismarck returned fire, her guns flashing through the darkness, but the fast and maneuverable destroyers were difficult targets. By dawn, the German crew was exhausted. The ship was still turning helplessly in circles, and the British battleships were closing in. On the morning of May 27th, 1941, the final engagement began. HMS Rodney, armed with 9 16-inch guns, and HMS King George V, with 10 14-inch guns, closed to near point-blank range. At 8:47, Rodney opened fire. King George V joined the barrage at 9:02. Bismarck attempted to return fire, her main battery seeking the enemy, but within minutes, at 9:08, the forward turrets Anton and Bruno were shattered by direct hits. The foretop rangefinder was destroyed, and with it, central fire control. The heavy cruisers HMS Norfolk and HMS Dorsetshire added their guns to the bombardment. Bismarck was being reduced to wreckage. By 9:30, just 43 minutes after the action began, the German command recognized the situation as hopeless. The order was given to scuttle, to detonate charges and open sea valves so the ship would sink rather than be captured. Yet the British bombardment continued, steady and unrelenting. By 10 o'clock, every gun aboard Bismarck had fallen silent except for a single 20mm anti-aircraft mount. The ship was estimated to have taken between 300 and 400 shell hits. Fires raged throughout the superstructure. Listing heavily to port, she was now a burning hulk. HMS Dorsetshire closed to deliver the final blow, launching 3 torpedoes into the shattered hull. Bismarck's end was imminent. At 10:39 on May the 27th, 1941, Bismarck rolled heavily to port and plunged stern first into the North Atlantic. The battleship that had dominated British attention for days vanished beneath the waves within minutes. She came to rest upright on the seabed at a depth of approximately 4,790 meters, 15,700 feet. Rescue operations began immediately. HMS Dorsetshire and the destroyer HMS Maori recovered 110 survivors from the frigid water. Then came a report of a possible German U-boat contact. The British ships broke off rescue efforts and withdrew, leaving hundreds of German sailors still in the sea. A German U-boat and a weather ship later recovered 5 additional men. In total, only 115 or 116 of the roughly 2,221 crew survived. More than 2,000 sailors were lost. Among the survivors was Baron Burkhard von Mullenheim-Rechberg, the 4th-ranking officer aboard Bismarck, who later wrote extensively about the ship's final mission. The British had not escaped their own losses. Just 3 days earlier, 1,415 men had gone down with HMS Hood. And on May 28th, as British forces withdrew, the destroyer HMS Mashona was sunk by Luftwaffe bombers, with 46 of her crew killed. The immediate strategic effect was significant. The Atlantic convoys, the lifeline keeping Britain supplied, remained secure, but an even deeper lesson emerged. As Winston Churchill observed, air power over the sea is in fact sea power. When the wreck of Bismarck was located in 1989 by Dr. Robert Ballard, the ship's armoured citadel was found to be essentially intact. No shell had penetrated her main belt, yet it made no difference. The ship had been rendered helpless, her superstructure shattered, fire control destroyed, steering crippled. Vulnerable systems, mobility and targeting proved more crucial than sheer armour thickness. The age of the battleship was ending. The age of the aircraft carrier had begun. After Bismarck's loss, Hitler lost faith in deploying large surface warships for commerce raiding. The Kriegsmarine shifted almost entirely to U-boat warfare. Bismarck's sister ship, Tirpitz, spent most of the war hidden in Norwegian fjords, tying down Allied forces but rarely risking combat. She too was eventually destroyed by British air attacks in November 1944. Bismarck remains where she fell, a war grave resting in the cold, dark Atlantic, a ship that served only 8 days in operational action, and a stark reminder of the limits of battleship power in an era that now belonged to aircraft and carriers. Nazi Germany's super battleship was gone.